All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about are just some basic computations. We're going to start out with 3 plus 5. Not a big deal, but there's not an equals button. So what you're going to do is press enter. 3 plus 5 is 8. Let's do a multiplication problem, and I'm also going to use a negative number in this. Let's type in 4 times, and I want to do negative 3. Well, this calculator is picky about the way you do a negative. If you hit the subtract button and 3, it's going to give you an error message. I need you to use the negative button, which is next to the decimal. Let me show you the error message you get if you hit the subtract key instead. Okay? It gives me a syntax error. When we are graphing things, I have people that get syntax errors all the time, and they always ask, what did I do wrong? Look, I typed it right. Well, no, they hit the subtract instead of the negative. If you don't know what you've done wrong and you get an error message like this, arrow down to the go to and press enter, and it will go to, and the cursor will blink on the part that's the problem. Well, when it's blinking there, it's kind of, I needed the negative button instead, so I'm going to type the negative button and hit enter, and it'll give me negative 12. Now, for these calculators, there's not a fraction button that looks like the ones on your on your scientific calculators. On these calculators like this, there's a button that's got an A, B, and a C on it for you to type your fractions. If you've got one of those Casio calculators, it's got a button that has a box over a box. Well, the graphing ones don't have anything that look like that. So we've got to talk about how to enter a fraction on here. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. Spencer, is your calculator an 83 or an 84? 84, okay. All of the ones in here that are yellow are all 84s. I have a couple of students that have their own that, older brother or sister had, and it's an 83. There's a couple of things that the 83s won't do that these will, but there's always a workaround. So that's why I was asking. Sometimes if one of these is not working right, I have some backups, and they are the 83s, and they won't do some of this stuff. But other than that, keystroke for keystroke, they're the same. To type in a fraction, I'm just going to use the divide button. Do 5, divide by 2, and press enter. Mine comes up as a decimal. Did anybody stay as a fraction 5 over 2? Okay, a couple. There's a way to set it so that it will always come up in fraction or always come up in decimals, and you can set it that way. But you need to know how to change it, because whoever uses this calculator in another class may set it up differently, and you need to know how to fix it to the way you like it. So if you'll press the mode button, it's just to the right of the blue one, and arrow down until you get to where it says answers. This is something that the 83s don't have, but all of these 84s have it. Mine is set to auto. You can arrow over to decimal and hit enter, and every answer your calculator gives you will be a decimal. You can arrow over to fraction, and notice it says approximate. It will always give you a fraction answer, but it may not be completely equivalent. Like pi is an irrational number, so it can't be written as a fraction, but it'll give you a fraction like 22 over 7, which is as close as you can get. So I like to leave mine set to auto. The other thing I want to show you on this menu while we're here is to go up one, and that's where the fraction type is. You can set it so that your fractions always show up as improper when you make them fractions, and that's just the numerator over denominator. If you go over to where you have the U and the N over D, the U stands for a whole unit, and then numerator over denominator, that's a mixed number. I like to leave them as improper. Okay. The only other thing on this menu that you need to know about at this point is the float part. This is where if you had directions that told you to round to a specific decimal place, you can tell your calculator to do it for you. Okay, so if I want to round to 2 decimal places, I'm going to go over to 2, hit enter, and then it's going to round whatever my answer is to 2 decimal places. Okay, I want you guys to stay right here. I'm going to go back to the other screen for a second. If I take my 5 over 2, which was 2.5, and I hit enter again, now that I've told it to round to 2 decimal places, look what it gives me. It's going to give me 2 decimal places. I'm going to go back and tell it don't round, because we don't want to round in here unless we're told to. So go back to float, and I want to make sure that the float is highlighted and then it's not going to round anything. Okay. So now, to get off of this screen back to the computation screen, press second and mode. Notice above mode it says quit in blue. So it's going to quit the screen you're on, and it brings you to here. Okay. There's another way to enter fractions, and I'm going to wait and show that to you when we come back from lunch. Okay. So if you'll just turn your calculators off, we'll pick up when we come back. All right. So where we left off before lunch, I believe we were just talking about the different settings in the mode button. A couple things I want to show you is, if you're typing something, like, does anybody have a whole bunch of stuff in your calculator already? Let's see. Yeah. Let me see. You can press. Yeah, let me see that. All right. So guys, if we're looking at this calculator, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. I'm going to start typing another problem. I'm going to do 8 times 5 plus 3, and I decide, oh, that's not what I meant to type. You can arrow back and change whichever parts you need to. Most of the time, I just hit clear and clear that whole line. If you press clear again, it will clear the whole screen. Okay, that's what I wanted you to see. And my calculator didn't have stuff in it. All right, so now we're going to talk about graphing with these calculators, which is what they're meant for. So on the far left-hand side, right underneath the window, there's a button that says Y equals. Okay. If your calculator already has equations in there, we need to clear them out. And all you're going to do is, put your cursor on the equation and then hit the clear button and arrow down and hit clear again until all of the equations that are in it have been cleared out and it looks like mine. So now, my screen looks a little bit different than yours because mine is the color version and it will graph in blue and red and green and purple. Yours is just going to be black and gray. Okay. I have several students who have bought their own, and some of them bought the color version. They're about $135. You do not have to buy one. Okay. We have these that you can use here in class. And remember, I told you about the free app for the Desmos graphing calculator that you can use at home. It works a little bit differently, but I think you can figure it out. Yes. Yes. Guys, these calculators can be used on the ACT. And so what I normally do, after we've had a chance to work with them in class some, if you're going to take the ACT, you just let me know. I'll have a sign-out place on my board. You can come get a calculator, sign it out, take it with you to use for the ACT, bring it back, take your name off my board, and it's all good. Okay. When we do the big ACT here at school in the spring that all juniors take, they are first come, first serve. Okay. And since, I have a 4th block class, I don't give them out after school one day. I give them out before school, and that way everybody has the same opportunity to get here at the same time. If I gave them out at the end of the day, my 4th block would end up with all of them, and the rest of y'all wouldn't get them. So just remind me when the ACT is coming up and you need to use them. All right. Next to the Y1, we're going to type an equation, 2x plus 3. Start out pressing the 2. To type the x, there's a couple of ways. There's an easy way, and there's a more complicated way. The easy way is to go up next to that green alpha button. There's one that says x, t, theta, and n. Press that. It'll put the x on your screen. Okay, just to the right of that green button. There is a more complicated way, and that's where you have to look for the X in the alphabet at the bottom, but that's too much trouble. So 2x plus 3. Now, let's hit graph. There it has graphed my line. Now, notice my graph right now is centered. The origin is right in the center of the screen. And on the x-axis, it goes from negative 10 to positive 10. On the y-axis, it also goes from negative 10 to positive 10. Is there anybody's graph that doesn't look quite centered? Looks a little bit off-center? Anybody's graph just look totally weird? No? Some? Okay, so if your graph looks totally weird when you get here, or it's not quite centered and you want it to be, to always go back to this configuration, what you're going to do is you're going to hit the zoom button, which is right in the middle under the screen, and choose option 6. So zoom 6 brings you back to the negative 10 to positive 10 on both axes. And guys, you will come in some days and somebody in another class, who thought they were being funny has changed it, or they were doing something with a problem and they needed to see the graph differently, so they changed it intentionally for real purposes. But you're going to need it back to here. You've got to know how to fix it. On test days, I can't tell you what buttons to push on the calculator to make it give you what you want. If you're going to use these on the calculator or on test days, you're going to have to know how to make it do what you need it to. I'm going to go back to y equals just a second. Looking at that equation, what is my y-intercept? 3. When you look at the graph, what is the y-intercept? 3. It touches the y-axis at 3. The table for this graph is also in this calculator. So if you will press the second button, that blue one, and press graph again, notice it says table above it. This is the table that goes with that graph. And if you think about that y-intercept, what's my ordered pair for that y-intercept? 0, 3. Well, look at my table here. The very top thing in my table is 0, 3. If you're looking for an a y-intercept, it's always a number for y, that's your intercept, and your x is going to be a 0. Anybody's table not quite look like this? Okay, does it just start with weird numbers, or you got lots of decimals? Okay, so here's how you can fix this, because some people think it's fun to scroll to like negative 498, and it's a waste of time to scroll. You can fix this real quick. If you look at the button that says window, right above it in blue it says table set. So press the blue button and window. You can tell your table what you want to be at the top in the X column. You can make it negative 3, negative 5. You can make it 0. I changed mine to negative 5. Underneath there, that's a little triangle table. That's a delta symbol. That means the change in your table. It's telling you what to count by. I want to count by ones. For some of the things we do, we will need to use decimals. So we might count by 0.1 or 0.01. Today we're going to do whole numbers. So now that we've made those changes, go back to the table. And if you made the same changes I did, yours now looks like mine. Okay, questions? No? Let's go back to y equals again. And I'm going to go down to y sub 2. And we're going to type in another equation. We're going to do 1/2, so 1 divided by 2, x minus 6. Now, notice both of those equal signs are highlighted, so it's going to graph both of them. If there's one you don't want it to graph, you put the cursor on top of the equals and hit enter, and it will unhighlight it. Okay, I want to put them both on there. So hit graph. And here's your second line. Mine, it's real easy to determine which graph goes with which equation because mine's color-coded. Yours are all grayscale. There is a way on your calculator that you can fix it so that the lines look different. Okay. So let me get my other calculator because this one works differently because it's the color version. Let me change something in here real quick. All right, so guys, when you press Y equals, move your cursor over so that it's on top of the equal sign. How many of you get this little thing with all the inequalities at the bottom? Okay, so you can make this graph inequalities if you want to. To do that, if I want to change that equals sign for 1/2 x minus 6, change it to less than or equal to. Here's how you do it. You're going to press the green alpha button and the button that's underneath the inequality you want. And so now when I arrow off of it, you can see it's showing less than or equal to. Now, not all of these calculators have that. If yours does, I want you to go back over and change that back to an equal sign. But actually, before we do that, let me show you what the inequality does when you graph it. Because when you graph an inequality, you've got to shade something. So there, it's shading it, and there's my other line. It just wasn't done yet?
No, I put the inequality sign
on the top? Okay. So back to Y equals. I'm going to change that back to an equation instead of an inequality. So the green button and the one under the equals. So here's how you can change these lines so that they look a little bit different. Okay? As long as you've got an equal sign for both of those, arrow over to the left of your Y1 and press enter one time. Notice it made your line bold instead of just a regular line. You can continue to press enter and you've got lots of other options. But I want to go back to the one that is just bold. Okay, now that I've made it bold, hit graph and you can see that it graphs bold. And now, if you look at that line, it's a little jagged. It's not completely smooth. The reason for that is the resolution on these calculators is not really good. Okay, so it's going to appear pixelated here. Okay. Let me go back to this one. All right, so if I were to ask you for the y-intercept for the red line, what's the y-intercept for the red? -6. Right there. What about the x-intercept? Can you see that? No. But I want to change my window so I can see it. There's a way to manually change your window. Here's how you do it. Find the window button underneath your screen. Press it. Which one of those do you think will let me see further to the right on my graph? X maximum. What do you think we ought to change it to? 15? You could go to 20? You don't have to go far because we were really close. And you don't all have to use the same numbers here. Okay? Now press graph and notice my graph is shifted just a little bit. On the x-axis, it now goes from -10 all the way to +15. So can you look at this and see where it touches the x? Yeah? Know what that number is?
12.
It's a 12. Okay? I imagine on your screens, it's kind of hard to count all those little bitty dashes because they are really close together. So instead of trying to count them all, look at the table. And here's what happens when I've got more than one equation in. I've got more than one y column. So let me explain the table first, and then we'll talk about how to find the x-intercept in the table. So if you take a look, you've got one x column and two y columns. So if we ignore the y2 column, you've got ordered pairs on the blue line that are -5, -7, -4, -5, -3, 3, and you know how that works. But also, that x column also goes with the y2 column. So ignore that y1 column, and you can see the ordered pairs for the red line. That's going to be -5, -8.5, -4, -8. Okay? So what I'm looking for is the x-intercept for my red line. If it touches the x-axis, which part of the ordered pair is going to have a 0? The y does. So I want to scroll down until in the red column I have a 0 in the red column, so I know that my x value that goes with that is 12. That's another way of finding the intercept when it's too difficult to see it on your graph. Okay, so guys, that's our introduction for the calculators. Everything we did today we're going to do over and over and over again throughout the rest of this chapter. You're going to get lots of practice, and as we go through additional chapters we will add extra features that we're going to learn how to use. Okay, but like I said, if you're going to use them on the test, you got to figure out how to use them before then, because I can't help you on test day. I can help you between now and then, but not on test day. All right, so turn your calculators off and put the covers back on them.